Hi, welcome. I'm Hannah. This is Theology Therapist. Today, I know that it is shortly after the holidays, a number of holidays, probably Hanukkah, Christmas, New Year's, but I wanted to just do a quick little video on the war on Christmas. We haven't talked about it here before. It does relate a lot to religious trauma, kind of these high demand, high control religious groups, and they can feel kind of culty. So because we haven't talked about it, I thought, what the heck, who cares? Let's go back and let's pretend that it is before in December, and let's do a little video on the war on Christmas. So first, though, I really want to give a disclaimer that I did not grow up with the most extreme beliefs espoused by Christian nationalism expressed at Christmas time, which I can say I'm very thankful for. There were some weird things, like going to church, you have to go to church every Christmas if it fell on a Sunday. That's not so weird, it's like really annoying when you're a kid. Or hanging up a stocking for Jesus. Yes, I am throwing my family under the bus here with this one, but it's just a little weird, and we're all kind of in different places now outside of the cultic community that I grew up in, and so I can tease them about this, which I did recently. Given all of this and my disclaimer, I will be explaining and showing some research here more than offering personal experience, okay? So Christian nationalism, what is it? Pew Research says Americans' views of Christian nationalism envision varying levels of Christian influence on the nation, ranging from strict theocratic rule, so like a God rule, to merely embracing moral values, such as helping others. Americans are divided from the research that Pew Research did. Americans are divided about Christianity's roles in the country, and they have diverse ideas about what it means to be a Christian nation. The other thing to note about this is that in the research they did, they found that most people don't know what Christian nationalism is. Like they haven't heard the term, especially someone who might be described as a Christian nationalist. Of the ones who they have more of a negative connotation with it than a positive. And we will see more about why. Maybe you already have personal experience and you know exactly why. So in Christianity Today, which is it used to be print. I believe it still is print magazine. It's also an online magazine. They have like a segment about Christian nationalism, and here's what they say. Christian nationalism is the belief that the American nation is defined by Christianity and that the government should take active steps to keep it that way, not merely as an observation about American history, but as a prescriptive program for what America must continue to be in the future. Christian nationalists do not reject the First Amendment and do not advocate for theocracy, but they do believe that Christianity should enjoy a privileged position in the public square. The term Christian nationalism is relatively new, and its advocates generally do not use it of themselves. But it accurately describes American nationalists who believe American identity is inextricable from Christianity. All right, so I wanted to give you these two side-by-side definitions about Christian nationalism because one is coming from a research organization. The other is coming from a Christian news source, right? And so they have different motivations. There are different reasons why they are talking about this. If you go read in the description of this episode, there are links to these articles. And so if you go read that Pew article, you'll see all these statistics about how the country is divided among people who profess to be Christians versus not, and what they and so like what they think about what it means to be a Christian nation and this idea of like Christian nationalism. So you see a lot of statistics and how those things kind of vary. Whereas in this quote by Christianity Today, I think that it's subtle, so it's not overt. You see a somewhat of understanding, if you will, of someone who might be described, because remember, someone who might be described as a Christian nationalist probably isn't using that term for themselves. And so there might be a little bit of sort of sympathizing that you might hear in this Christianity Today quote. So when we're looking at these different things and these different definitions, it's also important to look at who's saying them and why. You will see, if you go read both of these articles, that they have been published within the last few years. The Pew article is the most recent one, and so it is probably the most up-to-date one. It was published in October of 2022, and then the Christianity Today one was published in February of 2021. So also important to keep in mind when something was written to understand, historical context. When we're talking about Christian nationalism, what is really important to know is that extremist beliefs have gotten so wrapped up in religious language that it elicits a strong negative reaction. That doesn't mean that every person who professes to be a Christian is a Christian nationalist. One important point that this Christianity Today article makes is that Christian nationalists would believe that, there's probably a spectrum here, but not necessarily advocate for theocracy, so for like God-ruled country or like God-ordained, or like the laws that are made have to be in accordance with God as evidenced in the Bible. We might even say the King James version of the Christian Bible as of late, because there are many Bibles. So there's probably a spectrum here, so they may not say that, but they would believe that Christianity should have or deserves a privileged position within the public sphere. All right, now what the heck does this have to do with Christmas? Well, of people who express beliefs and adopt Christmas traditions reflective of Christian nationalism, there is a mindset of persecution to this holiday that might remind you of some things that you hear in the political sphere, the far right, especially in like the last few years, talking a lot about like this, using this persecution language. We're gonna recall that here in our conversation about Christmas. So the secular world and media are believed to be attempting to take Christ out of Christmas, not only by saying like happy holidays, but also like you have this visual of removing in Christmas that word Christ, by removing that. So what this can look like in Christian nationalist households is being forbidden to say happy holidays, being kept from traditional folklore or believing in Santa, and information control. So monitoring media intake, monitoring like television, music, phones, things like that. The reason why I would say that this exists why I keep saying that this exists on a spectrum is because there are some voices within Christianity who are saying that it is not the secular world's responsibility to bring the Christmas story or the Jesus story to people everywhere, but it is Christians themselves' responsibility. So the onus is placed back on the person of faith as either succeeding or failing at doing this thing. So I would say that there is this tension in these communities to like force Christmas and the Jesus story and sort of their traditions on the masses or like on everyone whom they encounter. And at the same time, and sort of expecting is not totally the right word, because we bring in this idea of persecution, this mentality of persecution here. It isn't expected. It is understood that the secular world will not echo these beliefs. And so because of that, there is a sheltering that has to happen kind of insulating. There's an insulating that has to happen. And there is this rhetoric of persecution. What we see that happens is that there is this, so this persecution brings on this understanding that the secular world is not going to echo these beliefs that are sort of like true reason for the season. It is understood that there is an evangelistic purpose to this season and to this holiday. And so as Christmas approaches, that tension grows, right? That tension grows between the belief that this is, I hold the true reason to the season, versus someone who doesn't understand that. And so I need like this interaction is met with the understanding of sort of persecution, if you will, because they might say, like, especially nowadays, they might say like happy holidays, or you might be confronted with, when you walk into a store, like commercialistic expressions of what the season is now, a lot of Christmas stuff, Santa, right? And so that might be offensive to someone who grows up in a Christian nationalist household. And so there's this tension between like that offended, like I'm being persecuted, and like that evangelizing, right? And so one thing that those of us like outside of that Christian nationalist household are gonna probably experience is the evangelistic understanding is colonization, right? Like many are talking about lately these days, is that the problem with evangelism is that it is colonization, right? Think about, I don't know, some of maybe the Christian initiatives or like these Christmas initiatives where you get a bunch of toys and then you send them off to, I don't know, an underdeveloped country or an organization in an underdeveloped country, right? Where potentially the state religion isn't Christianity. So as Christmas approached in 2022, just weeks after the Chinese government revised its pandemic policy, Christians felt the weight of suspicion and persecution. They wonder what the holiday and the evangelistic outreach that typically goes with it will look like in the changing political context. So that's an example of seeing, right, like the colonization that has happened. Christianity is not or has ever been a natural religion in China. And yet it's reached there. I'm not making a statement about that. So as you can see from this excerpt about Christianity in China, I'm going to provide a link to this article. It is another Christianity Today article. In case you're interested, you want to go read it. This is an example of how you can see how evangelism and colonization takes shape, keeping in mind the source, that it is coming from a very Christian, probably like mainstream Christian news source. So keeping that in mind. So I would say these are all really important aspects of Christian nationalism and the war on Christmas. The unofficial war on Christmas began when the Puritans banned celebrations of Christmas because they believed it wasn't in accord with biblical teachings in the 17th century. You may know that the US, America, has very puritanical roots. So it began back in the day as this puritanical ban on Christmas celebrations as an organized thing. Fast forward 400 years, and it was in 2005 that a book written by John Gibson, a radio talk show host, conservative, made the claim that there was a liberal antagonism towards the holiday. And there began, in 2005, the pickup of this war on Christmas. And I would say, so for the last almost 20 years, you have heard the uptick of this rhetoric, and then probably more once Trump was elected. when there became more and more talk of Christian persecution in mainstream media. Recap, this is an aspect of religion that is really worth exploring because it goes really wrong. It has puritanical roots, and so there are expressions of it that have been around for the ages, but probably most recently picked up right around 20 years ago-ish. It is problematic because of the high control nature of this idea of the war on Christmas. It is problematic because of the us versus them, so this persecution mindset, and then because of this evangelistic, or what can turn into colonization type of behavior or reality that can exist when when you have a war, there's, sort of like two sides-ish, winner or loser, right? So when you have this mindset and this rhetoric, that's what you're up against. And so it's really important to actually talk about the religious implications that are at play around this time of year. I want to be really open here. I love Christmas. I love this time of year, and I love seasons in general. I grew up with Santa, and I loved believing in Santa. I understand, and I want to leave room for the darker sides that Santa represents, like whiteness being associated with goodness, and a strange older man breaking into your house at night and watching you sleep. Since I am speaking with you from my experience here, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What was Christmas like for you growing up? Did you celebrate it? Did you not celebrate it, but you were constantly confronted with it? Were you raised with Christian nationalist traditions and the war on Christmas? Or if you were raised Jehovah's Witness without Christmas, is it something that you love going all out for? I can't wait to hear what you have to say, and I'm hoping that this time of year, as all of the rest, are exactly what you need it to be. See you next time.